for joining me today. My name is Elizabeth Gillikin, and I'm here to talk about medieval book furniture, specifically the process I went through to replicate and stress test 4 different styles of brass book furniture, or as I like to call it, finding out who's the boss. Medieval books were not only texts, they were physical objects built to survive handling, storage, travel, worship, and display. One small but revealing part of that survival system was metal book furniture. Bosses, corner pieces, centerpieces, clasps, catches, shoes, and edge protectors. In this video, I'll be examining the history, form, function, and development of brass book furniture in German and English manuscript culture from the 14th century into the early modern period. I then will be testing 4 reconstructed leather-covered wooden boards with different brass corner piece designs to investigate how changing forms and fashions may have affected overall durability. Let's start with some background on book furniture as a whole. Generally, the term furniture refers to external fittings that are attached to the binding of a book, especially metal components added for protection, closure, handling, or decoration. There are 4 main types that we're going to focus on today, those being bosses, corner pieces, binding strips, and fasteners. Bosses are raised elements that are attached to the faces of covers to protect them from wear. They're most often found near the corners of each board and sometimes in the center. Bosses were almost entirely made of metal, and they have a wide variety of shapes and appearances. Corner pieces are located at each of the 4 corners of the boards. They typically fold over the board edges, and they're occasionally turned over onto the inside face of the boards as well. It was common for corner pieces to be made as a matched set with a centerpiece, which is any piece of furniture located, as you might guess, at the center of the cover. Binding strips are attached to the very edges of medieval book covers to protect the edges from abrasion and wear, and they can also be folded over the board edges to sandwich the board in between each side. And lastly, fasteners. They are closure-related fittings such as clasps, catches, pins, straps, anchor plates, strap plates, and catch plates. They're used to secure 2 covers together, and they can take a wide variety of forms. A typical English or German medieval binding is made out of an oak board covered in leather and connected to the contents of the manuscript by some type of cord or thong, typically referred to as the sewing support. If we flip to look to the outside of a cover, we'll see an excellent example here of a centerpiece with its matching set of corner pieces. We also see 2 clasps here on the right and a chain on the top to secure the manuscript to a bookshelf or a lectern. Manuscripts were often used in settings that are very different from modern bookshelves. The writing would have been done in scriptoria such as these, usually before the contents of the manuscript were ever bound at all. Once a manuscript was completed, it could live in any number of locations. Common forms of storage in medieval libraries didn't involve books lined up neatly on a shelf. In fact, many manuscripts were stored upright in chests, in flat stacks, or even permanently stationed at a lectern inside of a church. The metal furniture helped to protect the leather and the wooden boards from abrasion and impact by lifting the surface of the cover away from the surface beneath, which would reduce direct wear. Heavy use and the damages of time leave us with many examples of ghost furniture, which is a term that's used to refer to the visible traces left behind by missing book furniture, such as stains, holes, impressions, outlines, or wear patterns, where bosses, corner pieces, clasps, or other metal fittings were once attached. We're going to divert briefly to discuss the importance of our materials and why this project focuses on brass furniture. The principal metal that medieval craftsmen worked with was copper. Pure copper was a versatile and fairly common metal with a melting point lower than that of iron. To improve the material properties of the copper, it was almost always alloyed with other materials. 2 most common combinations were bronze, which is an alloy of copper and tin, and brass, which is an alloy of copper and zinc. One thing to note, however, is that the composition of alloys was not nearly as strict as it is today, which has led to the common use of a general term copper alloys for brass and bronze adjacent alloys that are used in these types of furniture. In addition, furniture has also been made out of iron, silver and gold, and many other metals, but copper alloys are by far the most common. The two primary methods of producing copper alloy objects were casting and wrought metalworking. Casting involves melting the metal and pouring it into a mold, with different types of molds being suited to different kinds of objects. Molds could be open or enclosed and could be made out of sand, clay, stone, or other materials. Wrought metalworking is the shaping of solid metal by hammering or cutting. This is the process that I used to make all of my brass furniture for this project. To prevent the metal from work hardening, which is hardening caused by repeated deformation, the piece would need to be repeatedly annealed or heated up and cooled down to make it soft again and workable. Once a shape was cut out of a sheet of material, it would be formed into whatever the desired shape was, using hammers, dies, punches, chisels, and files. Now we're on to the fun part, the experiment. The fundamental question that this video addresses is the manifestation of form versus function in brass book furniture over a wide range of time. As book furniture developed, what were the trade-offs between appearance and strength? Did increasing one sacrifice the other? We're exploring this question through critical making, which is a research approach where physically making an object is used as a way to think, test, and learn about a topic. I aim to make 4 different styles of brass furniture that are attached onto identical covers. Each cover will then be put through a series of tests meant to replicate aggressive wear and tear that a bound manuscript might face, such as brute force impact against a table, sliding against a surface, impact on the corners and edges, and cover-to-cover sliding and impact with another manuscript. Our 4 designs are inspired by these 4 manuscripts. As you can see, the 2 on the left are 100 years or more older than the 2 on the right, and there are clearly different stylistic choices made for each one. We'll be simplifying the shapes down for this experiment, as seen by the furniture shown on the bottom of the screen. If you want to recreate this process at home, here's your shopping list. We'll be using 1/4-inch oak board for the base, wood screws and dowels to create handles for testing, and the boards will be covered in standard brown cow leather secured with embroidery floss. All brass furniture will come from these 24-gauge sheets, and everything will be secured with brass nails. There were certain choices made for the base structures in order to maintain a reasonable project budget at the cost of some historical accuracy, so keep that in mind as we move forward. The focus of this experiment is the performance of the brass furniture and not the board or the leather, so each cover was standardized to highlight those results. Now, it's time to build. We'll start off by cutting our oak board into 4 4x6-inch rectangles and hand planing the edges to achieve a bevel. Here's a sped up video of me attaching the handles to our first wooden board. I'm attaching the dowel with 2 wood screws to the back. As you can see, nice and easy to hold. After the handle is attached, we can measure out the size of leather that we will need to cover the surface of the board. Here's another sped up clip of me punching holes around the edges of the leather. This will come in handy when I want to start securing it around the wooden board, as I'm doing here. I have a large needle and some embroidery floss. I'm wrapping it around the post in the middle of the board, and then I'm going to string it through each hole that I've made, working my way around the edges of the board until the leather is pulled totally taut around the entire thing. This is in place of the typical adhesives or other things that would be used, because I'm not focused on that, I'm focused on the brass with this project. And there it is, nice and smooth. Once the leather is stretched tight, it's time to move on to our brass pieces. Most of the brass work was done on campus at the NC State Craft Center Jewelry Studio. I want to give a big shout out to their support with this project. We start out by measuring and marking our brass sheet, and then cutting it up into individual pieces. Here's a good view of me cutting the sheet with this metal cutter we have in the studio. It works similarly to those large paper cutters you'd see in an office. And then here on the right, that's me drilling holes into each piece so that I can eventually put a nail through. After the pieces are cut, we'll take them over to our dapping block. This is a special type of die that has hemispherical depressions and is used to bend metal into domes or hemispheres by striking the metal with a round punch and a weighted hammer. Here's the dapping block in action. You can see, even though it's sped up, I'm putting those metal pieces on that indentation, putting the punch on top, and then circling around as I hit. Next is everyone's favorite part, annealing. I have to do this to relieve the stress that's been built up in the material when I've been hitting it. So I heat it up really hot, and then I cool it down in water. After annealing, the pieces become discolored from the impurities and the copper within the brass coming to the surface of the piece, and they'll look something like this. Now we're back to hammering. This time I'm flattening things out and adding that larger indentation for the shallow oval style. I'm doing that with a stamp and a rawhide mallet. After that, we're going to need to anneal again. So we're heating everything up until it's red hot, and then quenching it down in water. I always like doing this, working with the flame. It's always a good time. Now we've transitioned out of the studio and to my studio at my house, aka my desk. We're trimming up the edges of all these pieces by cutting them off with a jewelry saw. This helps us get the desired shape that we want, and then after all of the edges are cut, we're going to take the pieces and take a file and file down all those sharp corners. This helps us not cut the leather when we attach it, and also just gives it a better look. Once all of our boards are made and our furniture is ready, it's time to assemble. Here is an ultra time-lapse collage of the assembly process for all 4 boards. I will say this took forever. I'm drilling pilot holes for each place that a nail is going, putting the nail in, hammering it in, and then repeating countless times. But they all turned out pretty nice, and they all have identical clasps to make the comparison equal. And finally, here's our lineup. From left to right, we have our binding strip design, square design, triangle design, and shallow oval design. Now, for the moment you've been waiting for, time to put them to the test. Here we have our first test, the table impact. I'm slamming them down on this piece of wood here with pretty considerable force, and just repeating for each time again and again. Now we have the sliding test, where I'm putting each surface onto this piece of wood again and aggressively sliding them back and forth. There is vertical pressure being put down as well as the horizontal sliding force. Now we're on to the corner and edge test. I'm slamming the edges and corners into the board. We ended up damaging the board pretty significantly with this one. And we did have a dramatic moment here where our first casualty, the triangle board, lost a nail on this test. Dun dun dun. Here's some of the damage that you can see after the fact. Our missing nail there and loose piece. We've got some scratches. Some corner damage. It's getting real. Now it's time for the versus. Binding strip versus square. Who will win? I'm rubbing these together and pressing them together pretty aggressively. Now we're on to triangle versus shallow oval, the showdown. Again, the procedure is going to be quite similar as before. Now, triangle versus square. Both are a little damaged at this point. You can start to see some scratches. Shallow oval and binding strip. This one was intense.
but both good contenders. A lot of scratches came out of that. Shallow, oval, and square now. And finally, triangle and binding strip. The ultimate showdown.
In the table impact test, square was the clear winner with no damage visible. Triangle suffered initially with some of the nails backing out of their holes from the sharp impact force. In the sliding test, the wide, smooth surface of the shallow oval dominated. The two sharper shapes, binding strip and triangle, had more edges that caught on the wooden surface as the piece moved back and forth. Binding strip was the clear winner in the corner impact test due to the fully shielded nature of the edges. Shallow oval took the hit on this one due to a complete lack of corner protection. Surprisingly, triangle had the least overall leather scratching despite having the worst furniture failure. Similarly, square ended with the most scratches on the leather, but had almost no furniture damage or loosening by the end of the test. If we total up the scores, we're left with an interesting ranking. Binding strip and square top the chart, with shallow oval only performing slightly better than our loser, triangle. Now that the official testing is over, it's time to take up some of that built-up rage that comes from driving 55 individual nails into brass, leather, and wood.
I recruited a helper to assist me with this part of the destruction for maximum power. We're testing first out the binding strip, which he has broken to failure here. As you'll see, the first thing that yielded was actually the board. We're moving on to shallow oval, where we're gonna repeat the same procedure. Just go crazy until it's broken. With this one, it lasted a similar amount of time. And again, as you'll see, the first thing to fail here is that oak board. So that's actually a good sign for our longevity. This one did have a little bit of damage on the bosses themselves. They were a little dented in, but really not very much. This was very satisfying.
As you can see once again, the boards were the first point of failure around the point where the handle was attached. This is a great sign for durability because most manuscripts that I know of don't have handles. Taking a step back to look at our results, we always want to keep in mind other design considerations besides pure damage resistance. Despite being the worst ranked, the triangle design is the best choice if you're prioritizing ease of repair. Similarly, the shallow oval outdid the rest of the batch by a mile in user experience. It slid so smoothly on the table, and the wide raised surface area ensured that it was evenly balanced. Despite the simplified forms, shallow oval and triangle also won for beauty, at least to some people. The circumstances of use for a manuscript are always the best informant of what type of furniture it should have. We can also touch on some more general observations from our testing. As a whole, resistance to brute force decreased as the date of the inspiring design increased. This does support a divergence between practical and showy manuscripts, but we should also keep in mind that survivorship bias is a real beast, and the manuscripts that tend to make it are not always the ones that are most practical or most heavily used. There were also clear innovations made in the later designs in other areas. We just discussed the categories of beauty and user experience, but there are more as well. And the most important thing to keep in mind, even though we're able to draw some basic conclusions from this experience, the development of these technologies was not linear. There are a huge variety of types, styles, and makes of furniture that we did not even scratch the surface of today. I hope that you had fun watching this video, because I certainly had a fun time making it. Thank you again for watching, and take care!